On Christmas, my dad locked me in the freezing garage while my sister slept warm in her room. They jetted off to Hawaii with her family, sending me a text that read, "Consider this your lesson." My mom added her own line cold as the air around me, saying I could survive on scraps. The house went quiet after they left, and all I could hear was the hum of the heater inside, knowing it was keeping everyone else comfortable while I sat alone on the cold concrete. The garage smelled of oil and dust, the chill sinking into my bones until my teeth rattled. I wrapped my arms around myself, wondering how my own parents could leave me like that on Christmas night. My sister's laughter had filled the house earlier, her children running up and down the stairs, while I had been treated like an intruder in the only place I was supposed to call home. It was Christmas Eve in Minneapolis, the kind of night when the air outside bit harder than knives. I was 32 and living back in my parents' house, a situation I never imagined for myself, and yet there I was, shivering in the dark garage while my younger sister Emily slept warm in her decorated room upstairs. My dad, Robert Joyce, had slammed the heavy door shut, and I heard the metallic click of the lock slide into place. The sound echoed through the freezing space like a final verdict. My breath came out in white clouds. The cement floor beneath me was so cold it seeped right through my socks. I pulled my thin sweater tighter around me, but it was no match for the December air that seeped in through every crack of that garage. My hands trembled not only from the chill but from the humiliation. In the corner, the faint glow of Christmas lights leaked in through a tiny window. I could hear muffled laughter from the living room, the hum of holiday music, and it burned like salt in an open wound. I pressed my back against the wall, the smell of oil and gasoline filling my nose. The garage was cluttered with old tools boxes from the 90s and a broken lawnmower. In the corner sat a stack of tires, and I pulled an old blanket from a shelf to wrap around myself. Though it was stiff and smelled of mildew, I sat there, knees drawn to my chest, listening to the howling wind outside. My teeth chattered so loudly I worried I might bite my own tongue. Upstairs I imagined Emily 4 years younger, cozy under a pile of new blankets. She has always been my favorite. Dad called her his sunshine. Mom said she could do no wrong. And here I was, the older daughter, treated like the family's burden. Every holiday the pattern was the same. Emily would get the best gifts, the new coat, the shiny jewelry. I would get socks or nothing at all. They used to say it built character. Tonight they called it a lesson. I shifted against the wall, trying to find a warmer spot, and my foot kicked something hard beneath the tires. I froze. The sound echoed oddly, as if it was hollow. Curiosity stirred through the numbness. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and pushed the tires aside. My fingers, stiff and clumsy, found the edge of an old wooden box covered in dust. The latch was rusted, but not locked. I dragged it out slowly, the weight scraping across the floor. For a moment, I just stared at it, my breath caught in my throat. Why would they keep a box like this hidden away? My heart raced with both fear and a flicker of hope, though I could not explain why. I hesitated, then reached down and forced the latch open. The sound of the metal snapping loose echoed louder than it should have in the frozen silence. Inside the box was a pile of yellowed papers tied with string. My hands shook as I untangled them. At first, they looked like old bills, letters, meaningless scraps. Then I found an envelope with my name written across it in faded ink. The handwriting was familiar, not my parents', but older, steadier. My pulse thundered in my ears as I pulled the paper free. I held it under the dim light from the window, straining to read the words. The letter began with the names of my grandparents. I blinked my eyes wide. The words said they had left something for me, something that was supposed to belong to me alone. My heart stumbled over itself. I shoved the other papers aside until I saw it, a folded document, brittle but official. It was a certificate of ownership, the kind lawyers use, with a value written clearly across the bottom. $1 million. I pressed the paper to my chest, hardly believing what I was holding. My breath hitched, a strange warmth pushing against the cold in my bones. All those years of being told I was worthless, all those nights of feeling invisible. And here was proof that my grandparents had seen me, that they had cared enough to secure a future for me. But the reality sank in quickly, heavy as the snow piling outside. My parents knew about this. They must have hidden it. That was why they kept me in the shadows. Why they treated me like I was disposable. A fresh wave of anger mixed with the cold. I clenched my fists, the paper crinkling. The sound of car doors slamming outside startled me. Through the small window, I saw headlights sweep across the driveway. They were leaving, heading to the airport. I remembered overhearing Emily gush about a trip to Hawaii, their Christmas present to her and her husband. So while I sat here shivering, they would be lying on a beach, sipping cocktails in the sun. The unfairness of it cut so deep I could hardly breathe. I pressed my forehead against my knees, clutching the documents, my mind spinning. The garage was silent again except for the wind rattling the door. My heart pounded with a new rhythm, no longer just fear but something else. The night that began with humiliation had cracked open something hidden, something that might change everything. I stayed there trembling, my thoughts a storm as heavy as the blizzard outside, wondering what exactly I had just uncovered and how far my parents had gone to keep it buried. The papers burned in my hands like a secret waiting to be unleashed. The garage floor never warmed, not even after hours of sitting curled against the wall, clutching that brittle stack of papers to my chest. By morning, my fingers were stiff and raw, but the words on those documents were burned into my memory. $1 million. My grandparents' names are written with deliberate strokes, and my own name, Lily Joyce, spelled out with clarity. They had seen me, they had remembered me, they had wanted me to have something of my own. As the pale winter sun seeped through the grimy window, my mind drifted backward. I remembered Christmases long before when I was just a girl. I could still see the living room glowing with strings of lights, my sister Emily tearing open boxes with bows, squealing as she pulled out new dolls or shiny gadgets. I remembered holding my small package, usually socks or a secondhand sweater, while Mom's voice floated over me with that same phrase she always used, "It builds character, Lily." I swallowed hard, trying to shake away the memories, but they clung to me like frost. One Christmas when I was 10 stands out. Emily had just turned 6. Dad wheeled in a shiny new bicycle for her red with a little basket. She squealed and hugged him, her blonde hair catching the glow of the tree lights. I stood in the corner holding a small book with blank pages, my gift. Dad clapped his hands together, proud of Emily's smile. No one noticed me slip upstairs to cry in silence. That night, I promised myself I would never forget how it felt to be invisible in my own family. The chill of the garage pulled me back to the present. My teeth still chattered, but a heat built in my chest. I flipped through the rest of the box, scanning every page. Old tax records letters with faded ink, and at the bottom, another envelope addressed to my dad. It was unopened, the seal still intact. My stomach twisted. They had hidden this on purpose. They had wanted to keep me in the dark. I tore it open with shaking hands. The letter was from my granddad, dated over a decade ago. He wrote about fairness, about how he had watched me grow into a thoughtful girl, and how he feared I would always be overshadowed by Emily. He said he wanted to make sure I had something that no one could take from me. I read it twice, the words blurring through my tears. For the first time in years, I felt seen. A bitter laugh escaped me. My parents had locked me in this freezing garage, telling me I could survive on scraps, all while sitting on a secret that could have given me independent safety, dignity. They wanted control, not fairness. I tucked the papers back into the envelope, heart pounding. Questions swirled. Did Emily know? Had she been part of the secret? Or was she just another pawn in their game I wanted to believe she was? Innocent. But the way she looked at me lately, smug and dismissive, made me doubt it. The sound of the furnace clicking on inside the house filtered through the wall. I imagined the warm air filling Emily's room, her curled beneath a pile of blankets, the hum of the heater drowning out the winter storm. I clenched my jaw so tight it ached. The contrast between us had never been clearer. When the lock finally scraped open hours later, the garage door swung wide. My dad's heavy boots thudded on the cement. He barely glanced at me, huddled there, my lips blue, the box shoved under my blanket. "You'll be fine," he muttered, heading for his truck. Mom's voice called from inside, sharp and impatient, asking if the suitcases were ready. Emily's laughter floated after her, light and careless. I watched them load the car with beach towels and luggage, chatter about flights and sunshine. Then they were gone, the rumble of the engine fading down the street. The silence left behind was deafening. I stood on trembling legs, clutching the box, staring at the empty driveway. The house was quiet now, but my mind screamed. I staggered into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stared out the window at the snow piling on the porch steps. The papers weighed heavy in my arms, heavier than any gift I had ever received. For hours I paced the living room, torn between fury and a strange, dangerous hope. If this was true, if the documents were valid, then everything I thought I knew about my place in this family was a lie. They had lied to me for years, and now the truth was in my hands. I sank into the couch, the leather cold against my skin, and unfolded the letter again. My granddad's words echoed in my head. "I want Lily to know she matters." I pressed my hand over my mouth, muffling a sob. I stayed like that until dusk fell and the house grew dim. The Christmas tree twinkled in the corner, ornaments catching the last rays of sunlight. It looked perfect from the outside, the kind of home you would envy. But the truth was hidden in the garage and in my lap, and it was about to crack everything wide open. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, the documents spread out on the quilt beside me. Every creak of the house made me tense. Every shadow felt like a secret pressing down. My anger simmered just beneath the surface. I whispered into the darkness words no one could hear. You took everything from me, but now I have something you cannot hide anymore. The snowstorm outside rattled the windows. The wind howled through the trees, but inside my mind it was louder still. I had found proof that I was more than the forgotten daughter. Proof that my grandparents had believed in me. Proof that my parents had betrayed me. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me more than the garage floor ever. This secret would not stay buried much longer. They came back from Hawaii tanned and glowing, like nothing in the world could touch them. The driveway was full of their laughter as they hauled suitcases out of the trunk, talking about beaches and cocktails as if Minnesota's icy winds didn't exist. I stood in the kitchen, staring through the blinds, my stomach twisting. They had left me freezing in the garage and returned as though I was nothing, more than a forgotten chore. That evening, I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked Dad if we could talk. He gave me a look that said I was already wasting his time, but he followed me into the living room. Mom settled in with her glass of wine, flipping through a magazine, and Emily sat nearby, legs curled under her like a spoiled child still basking in vacation bliss. I laid the papers on the coffee table. The envelope with my name sat on top, my hands trembling as I pushed it toward them. I said I found this in the garage. Can you explain? Dad's face darkened instantly. His jaw tightened, and he leaned forward, his voice sharp. Where did you get this? From your garage? I answered, my voice rising in spite of the fear burning in my chest. Grandpa left this for me. He wanted me to have it. Mom's glass clinked against the table as she set it down. Her eyes narrowed. That doesn't belong to you, Lily. You shouldn't have been digging through our things. Our things, I thought, watching the way they said it like an accusation. My pulse pounded in my ears. He wrote my name. He left it for me. You both knew about it and hid it from me. Dad slammed his hand against the arm of the chair, making me jump. His voice was low but laced with fury. Don't you dare accuse us. That money was never meant for you. You think you can come in here after all we've done for you and steal from this family? Steal, my mouth tasted the word, and it was a rock in my throat. It's mine, I said. Grandpa wanted me to have it. Emily snorted, her lips curled into a mocking smile. Oh, please, Lily. Do you really think they would leave you anything? You've done nothing with your life. Why would they waste a penny on you? Her words cut deeper than the cold had. My vision narrowed for a second as a memory flashed across my mind of 10-year-old me with a plain package and Emily with a brand new bike. Because unlike you, Emily, I never asked for anything, I said. Meeting her eyes, the sound of my own voice surprised me with how steady it was. For a split second, I thought I saw something flicker in her face, maybe guilt or maybe recognition, but Mom was quick to reach for the envelope. I lunged and snatched it back before her fingers could close around it. The room turned sharp, a pressure building like a storm. You don't understand what you're doing, Mom hissed. That money was handled years ago, it's gone. No, I whispered, although my throat felt raw now. It's here, and I'm not letting you bury it again. Dad rose, his shadow filling the small living room. His eyes burned with a fury that took me back to being a child who had dared something foolish. Hand it over, he said. Now. I shook my head, my legs trembling but rooted to the carpet. For the first time in years, I didn't back down. I kept the envelope pressed to my chest, where I could feel the weight of it. Not just the paper, but what it meant. Emily laughed softly, the sound a thin thing at the edge of the room. Look at her, she said, clutching scraps like they mean something. Always so dramatic. David, Emily's husband, who had been standing quietly by the door, shifted uncomfortably. Maybe we should all calm down, he muttered. But Dad shot him a look that silenced him instantly. The family performed its familiar choreography. Protect the image, deny the truth, shame the one who threatens the balance. I felt the room close in the walls, pressing on my ribs. My chest heaved as if the house itself wanted to push me out. With every ounce of courage I had left, I whispered, I know what you did, and I won't let you take this from me. Mom's face twisted into something I could not name, half rage and half fear. Dad clenched his fists, but he did not move forward. For the first time, I saw hesitation in him, a crack in the armor that had always kept me small. I took the chance and backed toward the stairs. The documents clutched against my chest, each step like walking a tightrope. I expected his hand to clamp down on my shoulder to pull me back to my place, but it never came. Maybe he feared what would happen if he made a scene in front of the relatives, who had already gathered, or maybe the seed of doubt had finally sprouted. At the top of the stairs, I turned back to look at them. The three of them stood framed by the twinkling Christmas lights that still circled the window. To anyone watching from outside, it might have looked like a cozy family portrait. Inside, it felt like a house wrapped in a lie, ready to split at the seams. I closed my bedroom door and locked it, pressing my back to the wood, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. My hands were damp against the papers. For the first time in years, fear sat beside something else in my chest. The Hotel of Dread had a new resident called Resolve. I slid the documents under my mattress and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the shadows that danced along the ceiling from the streetlights. Outside, the storm that had raged in the garage had moved rooms, and now the calm below felt brittle. Sounds filtered up, laughter cut short, the soft clink of a plate in the kitchen. The house breathed in and out, and in its rhythm I could hear the pulse of an unfolding reckoning. I lay back and tried to breathe slowly. My grandfather's handwriting had felt like a touch from the past, a witness reaching across years to say that I mattered, but it also raised questions that hurt. How long had they hidden this? How many small cruelties had been inflicted to keep it secret? How could people who called themselves my parents look me in the face and decide to let me freeze rather than be honest? Sleep did not come easy. I rose once and went to the window just to see them, the taillights disappearing down the snowy road, their silhouettes swallowed by the night. Emily's laughter from the living room echoed faintly and then was gone. Outside, the wind picked up and sent a gust against the house, rattling the shutters like fingers tapping impatiently. The next morning I moved with a new purpose. I had been planning for survival since I was a child, but this felt different. I had found something that did not just change how I thought about my parents. It changed what I could do. I could ask questions. I could demand answers. I could bring witnesses into the light. I could call places, read records, show the documents to someone who knew law more than I did. I could stop pretending I was small. I packed the envelope into the lining of my sweater and walked downstairs. The breakfast table was quiet, abandoned, a half-eaten muffin on a plate and a school leaflet folded open. I put the kettle on and watched the steam rise. My hands did not shake as much as I expected. There was a current under me now, a dangerous, thrilling pull towards something I had no name for yet. As I poured coffee into a mug, the front door opened and Aunt Marge poked her head in, breathless from the cold. "You okay?" she asked, looking at me with concern. I nodded and gave a small smile that felt like armor. "I am fine," I said, and under that I felt truth not yet spoken, a quiet sentence waiting to be read aloud. Later that afternoon, I walked to the library and sat among the stacks, the envelope in my bag like a pulse against my hip. I started making lists, names to call files, to find people who might remember Grandpa like Arthur Reed across town, old family friends, anyone who could corroborate the handwriting or the will. Each name was a thread, and I intended to pull until the whole tapestry unraveled. That night I lay awake thinking of the look on Dad's face when I refused to hand the papers over, thinking of Emily's mocking smile that had not yet truly cracked. For the first time I could imagine a future where I was not swallowed by their stories. I did not know how it would end. I only knew that I would not let them bury this, that the cold night in the garage had opened a door I would step through, no matter what waited on the other side. I met Janet Miller at a small cafe in downtown Minneapolis, the kind of place where the smell of fresh coffee lingered in the air and the old wooden floors creaked under every step. She was my friend from high school, though we had lost touch for years. I had heard she became a lawyer, and after the fight with my parents, I knew I couldn't face this alone. When she walked in, her presence filled the room. Her dark coat was dusted with snow and her smile was warm. But the moment she saw my face, her eyes narrowed with concern. "Lily, what happened to you? You look like you've been through hell." I told her everything, from being locked in the freezing garage on Christmas Eve to discovering the box hidden behind the tires. My voice shook, but Janet never looked away, never once dismissed the words pouring out of me. I slid the envelope across the table, my hands trembling as she untied the string and read the documents. She adjusted her glasses, her brow furrowing deeper with every page. Janet finally looked up, her voice firm. "These are real. This is a legitimate certificate of ownership. If your grandparents signed this, then the property and funds are legally yours." The words made my chest tighten. My mouth went dry as I whispered, "They knew about it, Janet. My parents. They hid it from me all these years." She tapped the tax records, her expression hardening. "It looks like they concealed it. And not just the existence of the inheritance. Look here, these filings from 2010 show unreported assets. They were hiding money, Lily." I swallowed hard. It was one thing to feel unloved. It was another to realize they might have broken the law just to erase me from the picture. Before I could answer, a familiar voice startled me. "Lily, is that you?" I turned and saw Susan Green, our neighbor from across the street. She was in her 60s, with kind eyes and a habit of noticing things others missed. She set her coffee on the table and leaned close. "I don't want to intrude, but I have to tell you something." My pulse raced. Susan lowered her voice. I saw what they did to you on Christmas. I was out shoveling my driveway when I heard the garage door slam. I saw your dad lock it. You were there all night, weren't you? I nodded, my throat tight. Susan reached for my hand. That's not just cruel, it's abuse. If you need me to speak about it, I will. I've lived next door long enough to know how they treat you. Tears burned my eyes. For the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. Not only did I have Janet confirming the documents, but now Susan was willing to stand beside me. Janet leaned forward, her voice steady. This changes everything. We have proof of the inheritance evidence of concealment, and a witness to their cruelty. You're not alone, Lily. I exhaled shakily, pressing my palms flat against the table. For years, I had carried the weight of being the unwanted daughter, the invisible one. But here in this little cafe, I realized the story wasn't just mine anymore. Janet began outlining steps, her voice clear and methodical. First, we secure these documents legally. We'll file a claim to establish your rights as the beneficiary. Second, we prepare for resistance, because your parents won't give this up without a fight. Her words steadied me. I nodded, though fear still clawed at my ribs. They'll hate me even more. They already do, Janet said quietly. But now you have the truth on your side. The snow outside fell heavier, frosting the window panes. Susan squeezed my hand before leaving, her words lingering like a promise. I'll be there when you need me. I sat back and listened to the hum of the cafe around me, the clinking of cups, the low murmur of conversations. For years I had believed no one would ever see me, that no one would care enough to speak up. Now in one afternoon I had 2 women willing to fight for me. Janet studied me with a lawyer's eye. You have to be ready for what comes next, Lily. Your parents may try to discredit you. They'll twist the story, make you unstable. You need to keep your head clear and hold on to the facts. Her words struck deep because I knew she was right. My parents had always been masters at painting me as the problem. I could already hear Mom's voice calling me dramatic, Dad's stern tone accusing me of disrespect. But with Janet's confidence beside me, I felt like maybe their lies wouldn't hold forever. We spent another hour going over details. Janet explained that the documents bore legal weight, but to secure them, we would need to file quickly. She promised to draw up paperwork and to contact a colleague who specialized in estate law. Her calm certainty was a balm to my raw nerves. When we finally rose to leave, the cafe felt different. The cold air outside stung my cheeks, but it did not feel as harsh as it had before. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking back into my life alone. That night, as I lay in bed with the papers hidden under my mattress, I stared at the ceiling and listened to the silence of the house. It no longer felt like a prison. It felt like the calm before a storm, one I was finally ready to step into. The ticking of the old clock in the hallway echoed through the stillness. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, let it come. The weight of fear had not disappeared, but it had shifted. It was no longer a chain dragging me down. It was a reminder of what I had already endured and survived. And as I drifted into restless sleep, I knew the next move was mine. The invitation came 2 weeks later, written in Mom's looping script on thick cardstock. Family Christmas gathering at the Joyce home, it read, as if nothing had happened. As if the screaming in the living room and the threats to tear up my inheritance had been a dream. I knew exactly what it was, a performance. My parents wanted to show the relatives that everything was fine, that the Joyce family was still intact, still respectable. When I arrived that evening, the driveway was lined with cars. The house glowed with warm light wreaths on the windows, candles flickering at every corner. It looked perfect, almost staged like a magazine cover. Inside, the smell of roast ham and sweet potatoes filled the air. Laughter rose from the dining room where cousins and aunts mingled, glasses clinking. But under the polished surface, I felt the tension tightening my chest. Dad spotted me first. His face stiffened for a split second before he plastered on a smile. Lily, glad you could join us. His voice was loud enough for everyone to hear, carrying a false warmth. Mom swept over, kissing my cheek quickly before moving to refill someone's wine. Emily waved lazily from the sofa, her new dress glittering under the tree lights. I forced myself to smile, but my palms were damp. Janet's voice echoed in my head, steady and reassuring. Sometimes the truth has to be spoken where it can't be denied. I had promised myself I wouldn't stay silent. Tonight, I would not be invisible. After dinner, when the plates had been cleared and the living room was full of relatives, sipping coffee and nibbling pie, I stood. My knees trembled, but I steadied my voice. I need to say something. All eyes turned toward me. The hum of conversation fell into silence. Dad's jaw clenched, his hand tightening around his glass. I pulled the envelope from my purse, the one with my name written in my granddad's hand. I held it up, my voice shaking but clear. On Christmas Eve, while you were all enjoying your vacation, I was locked in the freezing garage. My dad put me there. My mother told me to live on scraps. Gasps rippled through the room. My aunt dropped her fork with a sharp clatter. Emily rolled her eyes, muttering under her breath, but I kept going. While I was in that garage, I found this. A letter from my granddad. He left me an inheritance, a home, and funds worth $1 million. He wrote my name. He wanted me to have it. Whispers filled the room. My uncle leaned forward, squinting. My cousin shook her head in disbelief. Dad stood suddenly, his face red, his voice booming. That's a lie. She's twisting things, trying to steal from this family. My hands shook as I unfolded the document and held it up. My granddad signed it. The seal is still there. You knew about it and you hid it. Emily laughed, but it was brittle. Do you really expect anyone to believe you, Lily? You've always been jealous, always playing the victim. But then Pastor Henry, who had been quiet in the corner with his coffee, cleared his throat. His voice was calm but carried weight. I remember your granddad speaking of this before he passed. He told me he wanted to make sure Lily was taken care of, that she wouldn't be overlooked. The room stilled. Dad's face twisted as though he had been slapped. Mom's lips parted, her eyes darting toward the documents in my hands. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then my aunt murmured, I knew he adored you, Lily. He always said you had his patience. Dad slammed his glass down on the table so hard it cracked. Enough, he roared. This ends now. That money was ours to manage. She has no right. But the damage was done. The relatives' eyes no longer carried blind admiration. Whispers swirled, doubt spreading like wildfire. The perfect image my parents had tried to stage was unraveling in front of everyone. I felt my pulse in my throat, a strange mix of fear and relief. For once, the truth wasn't locked away in silence. It was out hanging in the air where it could not be ignored. Emily crossed her arms, glaring at me with venom, but I caught the tremor in her hand. David shifted uncomfortably beside her, his jaw tight. For the first time, I saw cracks forming in the armor they had built around themselves. I sat down slowly, my legs trembling, clutching the envelope in my lap. My dad's glare burned into me, but it no longer crushed me. The whispers of the relatives, the confirmation from Pastor Henry, had shifted something. The curtain had lifted. The rest of the evening dragged in a haze. Plates clinked, voices rose and fell, but the easy laughter was gone. Every glance toward my parents carried questions they couldn't answer. When I left the house that night, the cold air felt sharp and clean. My heart pounded, my breath puffing white against the dark sky. I clutched the documents close, my mind racing. The storm had broken, but the fight was far from over. The letter arrived on a gray Tuesday morning, tucked into a plain white envelope with the return address of a downtown law firm. My hands shook as I tore it open, my heart pounding even before I read the words, petition for fraudulent claim. My parents had filed a lawsuit against me, accusing me of falsifying documents and trying to steal what did not belong to me. The paper trembled in my grip, the bold black letters burning into my chest. I called Janet right away, my voice breaking. They are suing me. She was calm, though I could hear the steel in her voice. Of course they are. It is exactly what I expected, but they have no ground. We have the original letter, the certificate, and Susan as a witness. Do not panic, Lily. This is what they do when they feel their control slipping. I tried to breathe, but every exhale came shaky. I walked to the kitchen window and saw across the street that Susan was sweeping her porch. Her head lifted, and when she spotted me, she waved gently. That small gesture steadied me even as dread coiled tight in my stomach. The following weeks were brutal. Word spread fast in our neighborhood. At the grocery store, I caught people whispering. Some turned away when they saw me, their eyes full of doubt. Others offered me small smiles, quiet support. Minneapolis felt suddenly smaller, as if every corner of the city carried judgment. One night as I was driving home from work, I noticed headlights lingering in my rearview mirror. They followed me down 3 turns, too close, too deliberate. My palms went slick against the steering wheel. I pulled into my driveway and watched the car pause at the curb, then speed away. My chest heaved, my pulse racing. By the time I stepped inside, my hands would not stop trembling. The next morning, I found the garage door bent slightly, as if someone had tried to pry it open. A rusty crowbar lay in the snow. I stood frozen on the porch, staring at the marks scraped deep into the metal. It was not random. Someone wanted me to know I was not safe. When I showed Janet, she pressed her lips into a thin line. They are escalating. You need to be careful. But it also proves something. They are desperate. At night, the silence in the house no longer felt calm. Every creak made my skin crawl. I slept with the documents hidden in 3 different places, terrified that one day they would vanish. Meanwhile, Emily's voice grew louder in the neighborhood. She told anyone who would listen that I was greedy, unstable, a liar trying to ruin the family. I overheard her one afternoon outside the church, her laughter sharp as she told a friend that I was chasing fantasies. Her husband David stood beside her, his face pale, his jaw tight. The pressure tightened until I felt like I could hardly breathe. Yet in the middle of that storm, Janet uncovered something new. She handed me a file she had pulled from public records, her eyes sharp. "Your dad used part of your inheritance years ago. He borrowed against it for an investment that failed. That is why they are fighting so hard to keep this buried. If this comes to light, not only do they lose the money, they could face charges." The words sank deep, heavier than anything I had learned so far. My dad had gambled with what was meant to be my safety, my dignity. He had lost, and instead of owning that truth, he locked me in a freezing garage and called it a lesson. I sat at my kitchen table long after Janet left the file open before me. My hands traced the lines of his signature, proof of what he had done. The air in the house felt heavy, but beneath the fear, another feeling stirred. Anger sharpened into resolve. For the first time, I understood just how much was at stake. This was no longer just about the inheritance. It was about years of silence, of being treated as less, of being erased from my own family's story. That night, the wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and I sat awake, clutching the file. The fight had grown bigger, darker, more dangerous, but I could not turn back. Not anymore. The courthouse in downtown Minneapolis was colder than the streets outside. The stone walls seemed to hold on to winter, and the air smelled faintly of paper and old wood. My heart raced as I stepped through the double doors, clutching the file Janet had prepared. She walked beside me, calm and composed, her heels clicking steadily against the floor. I envied her steadiness. My palms were slick, my stomach churning. Inside the courtroom, my parents were already seated with their attorney. Dad sat stiff, his jaw locked tight, eyes fixed on me with pure contempt. Mom avoided my gaze, flipping through papers as though busy, though her hands shook slightly. Emily sat between them, lips curved into a smug smile, her arms crossed like she had already won. David hovered nearby, looking restless, but he stayed close to her. When the judge entered, the room hushed. My chest tightened as the proceedings began. My parents' attorney wasted no time standing tall and speaking loudly. He painted me as unstable, desperate, a daughter twisting family documents for greed. He claimed I had forged the letter, that I had broken into their garage to manufacture a lie. Every word stung, but I kept my face still. I glanced toward Janet and saw her give a small nod. Wait. Then came Susan. She walked to the witness stand, her gray coat buttoned to her neck, her posture steady. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with each word. I saw Robert lock Lily in that garage on Christmas Eve. I heard Marcia's voice through the door telling her to live on scraps. She was there all night. No one deserves that. Whispers rippled across the room. My dad's face darkened, and Mom's lips pressed together in a thin, pale line. Emily rolled her eyes, but her foot tapped nervously against the floor. Then Janet rose, her voice sharp and sure. She laid the inheritance documents on the table, sliding them forward. She spoke of the handwriting analysis, the notarized seals, the history of the property. Each piece of evidence stacked like bricks in a wall I could finally lean on. The opposing attorney tried to argue, but then Janet presented the tax records. She tapped the numbers with her pen. These records show concealed assets from 2010 tied directly to Robert Joyce. Funds that should have been declared. Funds that connect to the inheritance left for Lily. The judge leaned forward, studying the papers. My dad shifted his hands, gripping the table so hard his knuckles whitened. Then, just when I thought my heart could not pound any harder, the doors opened at the back of the courtroom. An older man walked in, his presence quiet but commanding. His cane tapped lightly against the floor. Janet turned, her face lighting with recognition. "This is Arthur Reed, a longtime friend of the Joyce family." Arthur was sworn in, his voice gravelly but steady. I was close to my grandparents. Before they passed, they asked me to hold on to certain documents, in case something ever went wrong. He reached into his leather briefcase and withdrew a sealed envelope. Inside was the original certificate of ownership, the ink clear, the signatures untouched. Gasps filled the courtroom. The judge studied the document, then glanced toward my parents. Dad's face was drained of color. Mom closed her eyes as if bracing for a blow. Emily's mouth fell open, her confidence crumbling in an instant. Arthur continued. "Your grandparents wanted Lily to have this. They worried she would be pushed aside. They told me themselves, and I swore I would protect their wishes." Tears pricked my eyes. My throat tightened. For so long I had doubted myself, questioned whether I was worth anything at all. And here in the middle of that cold courtroom, a voice from the past reached across the years to tell me I mattered. The judge ordered a recess, and as we filed out, I caught Dad's glare. It no longer had the same power. Mom refused to look at me. Emily hissed under her breath as I passed, but I barely heard her words. In the hallway, Janet squeezed my arm. "We are turning the tide, Lily. They cannot bury the truth forever." I nodded, still trembling, but for the first time the trembling wasn't only fear. It was the beginning of something else. The fight was far from over, but the ground beneath me had shifted. The cracks in their story were widening, and the truth was finally pushing its way to the surface. The house that once felt untouchable now echoed with cracks I could hear even from the outside. After the court recess, word spread fast, and by the time I walked past the Joyce home 2 days later, the curtains were pulled shut in the middle of the afternoon. For years it had been the house of loud parties, glowing lights, and Emily's perfect laughter drifting across the street. Now the silence around it felt heavy, suffocating. Inside, the family was splintering. Emily was the first to show it. She stormed out onto the porch one evening, her voice rising so sharply I could hear every word from my driveway. "You lied to me," she shouted at Dad. "You told me everything was ours. You let me think she was crazy, and now we all look like fools." Dad's voice thundered back, but it cracked under the weight. "Don't you dare blame me. I did what was best for this family." Mom's voice cut through sharp as broken glass. "Best for the family? Look at us, Robert. We are drowning because of your lies." I pressed my hand to my chest, my breath shallow. For years I had dreamed of them finally facing each other with the truth. But hearing it was more haunting than satisfying. It was as if the entire foundation of their world was shaking apart, brick by brick. A few days later, Emily showed up at my door. Her mascara was smudged, her hair undone, the confident shine gone from her face. She stood there, gripping her purse like it was the only solid thing left. "I need to talk." I hesitated but stepped aside. She sank onto my couch, her eyes glassy. "David left me. He says he can't deal with the shame, the gossip, the court. He says I should have known better." Her voice cracked. I wanted to feel sorry for her, but anger still burned in me. I crossed my arms, my voice cold. "You mocked me when I spoke the truth. You laughed when Dad called me a thief." She covered her face with her hands. "I know, I was wrong. I believed them. I believed everything they told me, and now I have nothing." The words hung between us, raw and trembling. For a moment, I saw the little sister she used to be, chasing me through the yard with a kite tugging at my sleeve to play. But the image blurred, quickly replaced by years of her smirks, her cruelty, her silence when I needed her most. I told her quietly, "You chose them every time. You let them hurt me." Her tears spilled, but she said nothing more. She left that night without looking back. I watched her walk down the icy steps, her figure swallowed by the dark street. Meanwhile, Mom began calling relatives one by one, her voice desperate, begging for sympathy, but the relatives had seen enough. Pastor Henry's quiet confirmation at the family gathering still echoed in the community. Whispers spread through the church pews, in the grocery aisles, at the gas station. The Joyces weren't pillars of strength anymore. They were a family breaking apart under the weight of their own lies. I sat by my window that week watching snow fall over the neighborhood and felt something strange. It wasn't joy, not yet. It was the quiet awareness that the tables had finally turned. For years I had been the outcast, the forgotten one. Now the cracks were showing in their perfect facade, and no amount of charm or money could patch them up again. The call came late Friday night. The judge had issued a temporary ruling, granting me legal recognition as the rightful heir. The full trial would continue, but the message was clear. My parents had lost their grip. I hung up the phone and sat in silence. The documents spread before me on the table. My grandparents' handwriting stared back at me, steady and sure. They had seen this coming in a way I never could have. Outside, the Joyce house was dark. No laughter spilling from the windows, no music blaring. I imagined them inside, sitting in silence, their voices hoarse from shouting at each other. For the first time in my life, I was not the one drowning in that silence. They were, and I was finally breathing free. By early spring, the consequences had started to show. The once busy auto shop that my dad had run for decades stood nearly empty. Customers who used to trust him with their cars now drove past without slowing down. Word of the court hearings had spread farther than I imagined. People whispered about the inheritance, about the lies, about the night I was locked in the garage. It seemed everyone in Minneapolis had heard a piece of the story, and no one looked at the Joyce family the same way anymore. I walked by the shop one afternoon and saw Dad inside, pacing the floor with his hands shoved into his pockets. The waiting area was deserted, the chairs empty. A faded poster of oil changes hung crooked on the wall. His shoulders slumped as he stared at the silent phone on the counter. For a moment, I almost felt pity. But then I remembered the sound of that lock turning on Christmas Eve, and the pity hardened into something else. Emily lost her job at the boutique downtown. I overheard the owner telling someone in line at the pharmacy that customers did not want to be greeted by the daughter who had laughed while her sister froze in a garage. Emily tried to hold her head high when she walked down the street, but the glances and hushed voices cut her down anyway. David was gone for good. His name disappeared from her social media. His truck no longer parked in their driveway. She was alone, her circle of friends shrinking with every week. Mom fared no better. She used to hold her head like a queen at church, her voice ringing out in the choir. Now she sat in the back pew, her eyes darting nervously at every whisper. Some people avoided her, others offered tight smiles that faded as soon as she turned away. Pastor Henry's words still lingered in the community, and no one could forget them. Meanwhile, I had moved quietly into the house my grandparents had left me. It was old but full of warmth, with creaky stairs and the smell of cedar in the walls. I poured myself into restoring it, sanding floors, repainting the trim, hanging curtains that caught the morning light. It was the first time I felt like I truly belonged somewhere. But the weight of what had happened never left me completely. One evening, as I unpacked boxes in the attic, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, Emily stood there, her eyes red, her coat wrinkled. She looked smaller than I remembered, her usual confidence gone. She whispered, "Can we talk?" I let her in, though my stomach twisted. She sat at the kitchen table staring at her hands. "I don't know where else to go," she said softly. "Everyone hates me. I can't find work. David won't answer my calls." Her voice cracked and she looked up at me, her eyes desperate. "Please, Lily, you have everything now. Can't you help me just a little?" I leaned against the counter, gripping the edge to steady myself. The anger rose sharply in my chest, memories flashing of her laughter that night in the living room while I sat, freezing her smirk at the family gathering when I stood alone against them. "Do you remember Christmas Eve?" I asked quietly. "Do you remember what you said when I begged for help?" Her face crumpled. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. "I was wrong. I believed them. I thought they loved me more if I sided with them." I watched her cry, my heart torn between old love for the sister I once played with in the yard and the scars she had helped carve into me. The silence stretched long, heavy, with everything unsaid. Finally, I pushed away from the counter. "I cannot fix what you chose, Emily." Her sobs grew louder, but I did not move toward her. I stood there until she finally rose, wiping her cheeks with trembling hands. Without another word, she left, her footsteps fading into the night. I closed the door and leaned against it, my chest aching. For a long time, I stood in the quiet, staring at the floor. The house around me was warm and safe, but inside me the storm still lingered. Justice was beginning to show itself, but the wounds of family betrayal were deeper than I ever imagined. The following week, I stopped by the grocery store and caught sight of Dad in the parking lot. He stood by his truck, talking to an old customer who shook his head and walked away before Dad could finish his sentence. Dad's eyes flicked up and caught mine. For a second there was fire there, the old anger that used to make me shrink. But it faded fast, leaving only weariness. He turned away without a word. I carried my bag of groceries home and felt the strange weight of power shift in me. The man who once made me feel invisible was now the one people refused to see. Mom tried once more to call me, her number flashing across my phone screen late one evening. I stared at it until it went silent. I could not bring myself to hear her voice, not yet. A voicemail arrived instead. It was her whisper, strained and broken. "Lily, please, we need to talk. You don't understand how hard this has been." I deleted it without listening to the end. The city's whispers grew louder as weeks passed. My parents' faces, once familiar at every charity event and neighborhood gathering, became symbols of cruelty and greed. And yet for me, the silence in my new home grew heavier at night. Justice had stripped them of reputation, but it had not filled the hollow space left in me. Outside, the Joyce name was crumbling one brick at a time, under the weight of karma. Inside, I carried both the victory and the pain, unsure which was heavier. I sat by the window one night, watching the spring rain streak down the glass, and wondered if healing would ever come, or if this was the price of the truth I had fought so hard to uncover. Inside, I carried both the victory and the pain, unsure which was heavier. Yet as the weeks passed, something inside me began to settle. The noise of gossip, the sting of betrayal, the long nights of fear and anger, all of it slowly turned into a quiet clarity. The final hearing arrived in early May, the city still thawing from a long winter. I walked into the courthouse with Janet at my side, my steps steadier than they had been months before. My parents sat across the room, hollowed-out versions of themselves. Dad's suit hung loose on him, his hair grayer than I remembered. Mom clutched a tissue in her hand, dabbing her eyes, though no tears seemed to fall. Emily wasn't there. The judge spoke firmly, her words echoing off the walls. "The inheritance belongs to Lily Joyce as the rightful beneficiary. The concealment of assets is documented and cannot be dismissed. My breath caught in my throat. It was over. The papers, the secrets, the years of being told I was nothing. All of it had led here. I didn't cry, not then. I sat still as the gavel came down, sealing what I already knew in my bones. My dad slumped back in his chair, his face pale, while Mom covered her mouth with her trembling hand. When we stepped outside, the spring air hit my skin like a blessing. Janet squeezed my hand, her smile soft. "You did it, Lily. You held your ground." I nodded, though my chest ached. Winning did not erase the scars, but it gave them meaning. Life shifted quickly after that. I moved fully into the old cedar house, pouring my days into turning it into something beautiful. I ripped out the cracked linoleum in the kitchen, replaced it with warm oak floors, and painted the walls soft cream. The attic became my writing room, filled with light from the dormer window. For the first time, the house felt alive again. But it was not only for me. I remembered my granddad's words about wanting me to be seen, not forgotten, so I opened the doors to others. I turned the front parlor into a small reading room and filled the shelves with books I had collected over the years. Neighbors began stopping by, first out of curiosity, then out of habit. Children came after school, curling into chairs with stories in their laps. Older women brought pies and sat with me at the kitchen table, sharing their own family struggles. The house became more than mine. It became a place of refuge. Meanwhile, the decline of my parents was impossible to ignore. The auto shop closed within the year. Dad's health faltered, the stress carving deep lines into his face. Mom retreated from public life, rarely leaving the house, her voice no longer heard in the choir. Emily moved to another state, trying to escape the whispers, though I heard from a cousin that she struggled to find steady work. Karma has a way of circling back, slow but steady. I did not need to lift a finger. Their own choices caught up with them. One summer afternoon, as I watered the garden outside my new home, Susan came by with a basket of strawberries. She smiled warmly, her eyes full of pride. "You held on, Lily. You showed them that truth can't be buried forever." Her words stayed with me. For so long, I had wanted revenge to feel like fire, to burn as hot as the cold garage where I was locked away. But in the end, it felt more like light breaking through after a storm. Quiet, steady, undeniable. Some nights I still dream of that Christmas Eve, the sound of the lock sliding shut, the way my breath fogged in the air as I curled against the cement floor. But when I wake, I see the soft glow of morning through my curtains, hear the hum of life in the house my grandparents meant for me. The darkness of that night will never leave me, but it no longer defines me. I find myself thinking often about forgiveness. Not the kind where you excuse what was done, but the kind where you no longer let it poison you. I don't know if I will ever forgive my parents fully. The scars are too deep, the betrayal too sharp. But I have forgiven myself for believing their lies, for carrying their cruelty as if it was my fault. That freedom is worth more than the inheritance itself. Now, when I sit on the porch in the evenings, I watch the neighborhood children ride their bikes past, their laughter filling the air. I feel a peace I never thought possible. The little girl who once sat forgotten on Christmas is still inside me, but she is no longer invisible. She is home, she is safe, and she is finally seen. And maybe that is the lesson in all of this, that justice comes in many forms. Sometimes it is a gavel striking wood, sometimes it is the silence of a closed shop, and sometimes it is simply the quiet strength of standing tall when others try to keep you small. So I leave you with a question. If you were in my shoes, would you forgive the family who betrayed you? Or would you let them live with the weight of their choices? Tell me what you think, because I know I am not the only one who has lived through a story like this. And if my story spoke to you, stay with me for more, because there are so many truths still waiting to be told.